Hi, Eliano. Thanks for joining. Can you hear me?
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
Rod, can you hear us both? We were online and then we just went black. So I don't know if the screen to the room is still there.
okay. Should I take off my video or should
Just take off your video for a second while I figure things out, I guess. But thanks again for joining. I'll just give you an update in just a minute.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, colleagues. Welcome to this event, which is on building resilient global supply chains for solar. Over the past about a year, Gita, we have worked together with the Becquerel Institute on preparing this discussion, and we look forward to your comments on this. Without further ado, Cecilia, who is with the European Commission, may I request you to say the opening remarks before I hand it over to Gaetan, and then I am requesting you to moderate the discussion as well.
Many thanks, Dr. Mato. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I think we have a very important topic to discuss. We had yesterday a very nice discussion among the 15 member countries of the ISA that are part of the Europe and other regions group. To discuss a bit of the progress that the ISA has made in the past year on various capacity building program, private sector engagement, and their new plans for the solar facility. And today we will have this roundtable to discuss in more depth the solar manufacturing topic. And I think it's very clear to everyone that the world needs more renewable energy in order to fit, to match the Paris Agreement objectives. That is why the President van der Leyen proposed in April that we would work towards global renewable energy and energy efficiency targets. Why renewable energy and energy efficiency together? Because it's actually going hand in hand. You have to work on energy efficiency if you want to be able to address the energy demand needs of the world. And that is why we propose, she proposed them together, and that is what we are working on towards COP28. For the renewable energy targets, you can hear various options, but the idea is that we need to triple the pace at which we install new renewable energy capacity, and this will mean much more solar energy for sure. The EU, we adopted recently new targets, 42.5%, with the possibility of trying to aim at 45% by 2030. In the solar energy strategy of the European Union, this represents actually doubling the current capacity to 320 gigawatt by 2025 and 600 gigawatt by 2030. This means multiplying by 4 what we have installed today. And this is the EU, where I would say we already are not so bad, and there's so much more to be done in all the ISA developing countries where there's great sun potential, but the investment is too slow and doesn't follow the needs. But what we discussed also yesterday, and I think Dr. Matou made the remark, is that the value chain already starts having hiccups. There were parts of Africa who were not able to source solar panel during last year, a few months. And this can't happen. I think in order to develop the ambition that we all have across the world, we will have to make sure that the supply chain follows. And today, I mean, it's a reality for everyone that is currently in the very much dominated by China. 80% of the manufacturing is currently happening there. And we saw during the COVID crisis that it's a risk for supply in general, but also increasingly there's a concern about possible geopolitical risks on the value chain. So while the EU has some strong position on some parts of the value chain, like the polysilicon or the inverter value bits, we are fully dependent on other parts like ingots, wafers, and cells. So the EU, but also other countries, have really an industrial opportunity to seize, because there is a huge market. And there are some actors who are looking at diversification. I think our colleague from the US mentioned it yesterday, that it's also the aim of their country. So we launched, we launched in December last year, the Solar PV Industry Alliance. It's a dialogue platform to allow all the actors of the value chain, not just the manufacturer, but also the buyers, the financiers, the research actors, the recycling industry, to discuss on how to expand the manufacturing capacity in order to develop innovative, efficient, and sustainable PV. I think we have to be very clear that we can't just do the same in China. If in order to be able to bring back this industry in Europe or in other parts of the world, we will have to be competitive in some ways. And if it can't be on price, it has to be on other criteria. And sustainability, innovation, efficiency is, in my view, or the EU view, what we have to work on. The Net Zero Industrial Act that was published on 16 March is an extension of that. I think the production of net zero technology is the objective. We want to improve the competitiveness, the innovation, and the resilience of the EU industry towards the technologies that we will need in future. So we won't be able to bring the entire value chain back in Europe. We will also probably not be able to produce ourselves everything the European market needs, and certainly not what the world will need. So we need to look at other partner countries to develop their own value chain or part of the value chain that we can rely on. And I think today's discussion is an excellent opportunity to discuss that and see how, as a group of actors and the ISA, we can work towards these objectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Celia. I think it places into context the importance of having a supply chain that is diversified. There is manufacturing occurring at various levels. And without further ado, let me turn to Gaetan to present the findings of the analysis that has been carried out on where does this make sense. Gaetan? I should also point out that my colleague Alex Huygen-Reuters is online, and Gaetan, I think what we'll do is we'll ask Alex to say a few words after you've spoken.
After or before?
Before? Okay.
Oh.
Before. Okay. Alex, all yours.
Yes. No, I'll make some concluding remarks at the end, but I just did want to thank Gaetan and his team, Philippe and Elena and Dilinka, for their hard work and dedication in creating this report. It is on building resilient solar supply chains. We looked at a number of emerging markets. The focus here today is Europe, but I think what I really want to emphasize is the importance of us all working together. How do we get European companies setting up manufacturing in emerging markets? How do we have different parts of the supply chain in different places, and the linkages and taking advantage of the natural endowments of different places, and certainly keeping trade open and working together and collaborating. So that is really what we're here today to do. We'll also be having a similar discussion at the Clean Energy Ministerial, which is an even broader global audience. So I think this is very much the preview or the Europeans' perspective that will hopefully inform that discussion as well. And with that, I just want to thank Gaetan and his team and hand it over to him to kind of present the high-level findings of the report.
Thanks, Alexander and all. Good morning. I hope this works because I'm pushing the green button and
I think there's a minute before the slides come up.
ooh. So before the slides come up, I will start by presenting myself. Thanks first for introducing Alexander and for thanking my team, because of course the report has been written by a team of people from Becquerel Institute. Becquerel Institute is a consulting company specialized in PV now for almost 10 years, based in Belgium and France, but active globally. I'm the CEO of Becquerel Institute. I'm a French and Belgian citizen. I'm also the co-chairman of the European Solar Manufacturing Council. And with regards to everything that relates to solar supply chain, I'm involved in several manufacturing projects in Europe. I'm trying not to confuse what's the project in which I'm involved and those where Becquerel Institute are involved. And Becquerel Institute has supported until now 6 manufacturing projects or projects for manufacturing, which is totally different, in South Africa, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Morocco, and in the European Union. I will try again now, but are you sure it's a few seconds or it's a few minutes? Oh, perfect, it's working. Great. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I will explain what my company is doing to people who are interested. I would like to start with the rationale. What are we talking about? This slide has been done already some time ago, so you might find some numbers a little bit inaccurate, and I will come on that also to tell you how fast things are evolving in the PV sector. The most interesting thing to start is the dynamic of the PV market globally. And with more than 200 gigawatt installed last year, almost 240, many people in the energy system have been extremely surprised at the speed at which PV developed. When we're talking about time frame in the energy sector, we're thinking in general in decades. If we just look where we were 10 years ago with 30 gigawatt installed, where we are now and what could happen in the coming years, something is sure, is that the development of PV is going extremely fast. It's going extremely fast, and that's the second thing, it's going so fast that a certain number of conjunctural shocks are happening very often to remind us that PV system prices are something which can evolve extremely fast. We have seen in the last year the cost of shipping going up and down, and fortunately down, but we have seen also the cost of a certain number of raw materials used in PV going up and down. And I could go much further in that later. The more spectacular one, and that's an old figure on polysilicon, I will show you the latest one, have seen prices multiplied by 5 in a matter of months, and then divided by 5, and even more now, also in a matter of months. So it's an industry which is experiencing on a regular basis huge shocks. The third figure is quite clear. It's showing the concentration of this industry. And here I'm just interested in the PV module value chain, so polysilicon, ingot wafer, cells, and modules, which is showing that a very, very large part is concentrated in one single part of the world. It's not my goal to criticize China. It would be much more interesting to see why other countries and regions haven't stepped in sooner than what our Chinese friends did. Well, I assume that I can consider the screen there. Yeah, it looks fine. If we are looking a little bit at these 3 points, indeed, there is a growing business opportunity. We're talking about markets around 300 billion euro this year, or US dollar, but we're looking at also an increased risk with regard to supply, not only because of the concentration in one single country, but also because of the dependencies that we have created along the value chain. I will come back on that. And a very strong desire for energy and industrial independence. While PV was considered a few years ago as, I would say, a niche market in many countries, and no one cared whether PV modules could come from one single region of the world or country, it's not the case anymore. We have seen in a certain number of scenarios that by 2050, PV could represent up to 50% of the energy demand in the world. And I haven't said electricity, I've said on purpose energy. If 50% of our energy is coming from one single source, and that's all components are produced majoritarily in one country, I don't have to draw conclusions about the risk that it represents. I will not spend too much time about the report itself. I will spend more time about the conclusions. But first, I would like to thank the ISA for the trust and the excellent collaboration that we had in writing this report. I'm extremely pleased, and my colleague Philippe Massé and Elina Bosch, the two who coordinated the report, are extremely happy about how it went and asked me to pass their regards. And they are all involved in European project meetings in Europe. It's very, sometimes they would need clones as well. I will here go through the methodology behind the report. There is a lot of information here, and I will go pretty fast, otherwise we will spend 3 hours on that. But basically 6 key elements. First, scenarios. What are we considering when we're thinking about PV market development? Which are the scenarios that we would like to use? And you see that we have taken some quite bold scenarios, but our experience in the last 10 years is that when we have considered too pessimistic scenarios, we have always been beaten by the markets, and would prefer to consider that we are on the safe side by taking extremely bold scenarios rather than the opposite. We have also considered future performances of cell and module technologies based on what we know for the time being. We know it's not a revolutionary industry, it's an evolutionary one. And so we have a pretty good idea of where we will be until 2030. After 2030, it can be a bit more complex. Of course, we have considered the current regional distribution of the PV market. I will not spend too much time on that and how it can develop. We have also taken a certain number of assumptions on facts about how factories are spread in the world for the time being, and which are the 2 pathways. One, it's definitively localized and against what we see for the time being, concentrated value chains. And then, of course, the analysis with 3 important parts: policies, economics, and markets. I will not spend too much time on that because you all know it. If we want to decarbonize the economy and avoid catastrophic climate change events in the coming decades, PV is one of the solutions, not the only one, to the problem. PV is one of the solutions to decarbonize not only electricity, but energy production. But it means, if we want to reach these targets before 2050, is that we need to multiply the level of PV installations by a factor 10 between now and a little bit more than 2030. When I'm saying a factor 10, it means going from 240 to 150 gigawatts to more than 2 terawatts installed per year, 2,000 or 2,500 gigawatts. It's something which might seem extremely complex and difficult to achieve, but we have done it already. Some people were telling me 10 years ago that we would never install 200 gigawatt per year. We are there, and it's going faster than that. And I will not spend too much time on the details, but the main scenario that we have considered is the one from Lappeenranta University of Technology, Christian Breyer in Finland, who in my opinion is the only fully integrated scenario, considering all sectors, not only the electricity sector, but also transport industry and more, which considers that we should install 80 terawatt of PV by 2050 to probably fight climate change. If we multiply the need, and not only in Europe, that total transition scenario for Europe shows how much we should install by then, it means that basically we need to multiply the current production of PV components by a factor 10. I should have put a slide showing what it means in terms of millions of tons of production, but I think most people in the room have a clear idea about what it means in general. Multiplying it by a factor 10 means basically replicating 10 times what has been done in China until now. It also means that what we have to install in Europe is quite tremendous. If you look at just the figure, it means going from the 200 or a bit more than 200 gigawatt where we are now to more than 3 terawatts installed just in Europe by 2035. It's quite a challenge. And I'm only considering the most ambitious scenario because I think basically it's what's going to happen. I love the summary, which says the booming global solar PV market will create space for new industry players. And that's sometimes my colleagues have a way to summarize things, which I appreciate a lot. Those opportunities will not be distributed evenly across value chain steps. And indeed, I met plenty of people around the world wanting to develop PV in general. And the more you explain the constraints, the technology constraints behind manufacturing, the more the conclusion is quite simple. Most would like to do modules, but if most do modules, what's happening? It means that the core of the value chain, which is basically producing PV cells, we're not producing electricity just with glass and encapsulants, is considered in many countries as too complex to be set up. And in terms of investment, in terms of skills, in terms of ability to develop these technologies, it's much more complicated than what many countries think. It requires an industrial base. It requires the ability to form engineers, technicians, and to run, and that's the most important thing, these factories 365 days a year with a high level of quality in order to simply be competitive with our Chinese friends. How can we do that? We all know that we are not in a sector where the free markets can operate. And then we need indeed, and that's one of the things that we did in this report, is identifying which policies have to be applied locally in order to enable the development of manufacturing. I will not go through all of them, and I really think that the combination of these policies depends highly on the local situation, the local habits. We had that discussion a few minutes ago before starting, saying that the US are not India, that India is not Turkey, Turkey is not the European Union, and even the European Union, we have very different ways of incentivizing the industry country by country. Some ideas have to be considered anyway. Local content requirements, local content premiums, tax credits, grants, low-cost financing, accelerated depreciation. I think when we are looking at everything that has been done in the US, in India, but also in some European countries, and in China, we have a perfect collection of everything that can be done. So the question is more, what are the policies that we need to do that? And that's something to which I will not answer today because it's quite complex and many things that have been detailed in the report. But one thing that I can tell you is that everything is needed. CapEx support, OpEx support, non-pricing measures, and most probably, in some case, at least for a part of the market, closing the market to cheapest imports. I will not spend too much time on that. I will go to the next one. There are too many slides here, and I would let you the pleasure of looking at them. Something is extremely important, and that we don't realize very often, is that the Chinese PV industry has reached a level in terms of technology, in terms of costs, which is difficult to replicate in a few years or in a few months. And we should be a little bit humble at some point and recognize that China did an incredible job. China did an incredible job in developing massively that industry. And we should be all grateful, because what we have here today in terms of extremely low price and massive availability of PV components is thanks to massive investment in China. Now we have to replicate what they've done. And we shouldn't fool ourselves. It's not going to happen in 2 months or 2 years. It will take most probably a decade in India, in the European Union, in the US, and everywhere else. And when I'm saying everywhere else, there are not so many places in the world where I think we will be able to redevelop the industry for the reasons I mentioned before, because it requires local technology development. It requires also skills. It requires capital, CapEx, and it requires the ability to set up smart policies and make them evolve fast enough. But the Chinese are market leaders. They have invested massive amounts, and they continue to invest massive amounts. So any company starting now in either US, Europe, or India will be significantly defavorized, whatever the conditions, based compared to existing Chinese players. We can do what we want, and I will come back to the latest price development later. We shouldn't, and I say it again, shouldn't fool ourselves. The competition will be extremely tough if companies can survive the first years. Recent developments. I will not focus on everything. I could have decided to focus on glass prices. You all know that's a very, very large part of glass which is used in PV, and we have people in the room who will tell me that we are not forced to use glass. It's not reacting, so it's no drama. But I wanted to focus on polysilicon. Why am I focusing on polysilicon? Because we have seen tremendous ups and downs in the polysilicon market over the years. For those who are in PV for I would say more than 15 years, we have experienced from 2006 to 2008 a first price hike due to a shortage of polysilicon. And it was a significant one. We have seen no decline in PV prices from 2006 to 2008, and then the Chinese came in. And by producing massively, they reduced the price. And what have we seen in the last years? We have seen, due to a very fast PV market development, and for the first time, or I would say maybe the second time, the lack of anticipation from a certain number of players, we have seen polysilicon prices going extremely high. They went from $5-6 per kilo in 2019 to more than 40. And they went down. So the figure is not completely updated, because last year I've seen average prices for polysilicon around $7.5 per kilo. And what's going to happen? This is going down further. And this is going down further because our Chinese friends have invested enough so that at the end of 2024, we'll have 2 million tons of polysilicon production, mostly in China. 2 million tons of polysilicon production, it's enough for 900 gigawatts. 900 gigawatts, maybe even 1 terawatt to fix the things, with a market which might be this year in between 300 and 350 gigawatts. I don't have to tell you that we are facing, again, huge overcapacities. Polysilicon price is going to go down extremely fast. What does that mean for non-Chinese players like Wacker, Mlock, OCI, and some others? It means that basically the competition will be fierce again. If we discuss with a company like Wacker, Wacker would be happy if they could sell around $20 per kilo, sometimes a bit lower, but not 7 or 6. So again, one of the problems that we will see in Wacker is an excellent company doing that business for a very long time with capacities at scale. So the problem we are facing here is that basically we will depend on Chinese polysilicon for the coming years, and we'll have huge difficulties to compete with market prices. And it could simply wipe out all polysilicon production capacities outside of China. I love that one, which shows basically the evolution of PV module prices. You will tell me there are different technologies, but what is interesting is the trends. And looking at PV module prices in the last months, we have seen prices going down very fast. The prices at which you can buy a PV module for the time being on the market is below $0.2 per kilo. And prices are going down. And they are going down again for the same reason as I mentioned for polysilicon, is that we have more than 600 gigawatts of PV wafers, cells, and module capacities in China for a market which is somehow half of it. And it continues. So no new production capacities for wafers, cells, and modules are continued to be put online almost on a weekly basis in China. So again, overcapacities and prices are going down. And at the time of doing these slides, we were at $0.19 per watt peak average price. It went down in the last 2 weeks to in between 16 and 17. And overcapacities are not going to be solved immediately. So it will go down, and that's the consensus in the industry for the time being, around 0.15 or even lower. Can anyone produce at these costs? No. No one. Not only in China. But the Chinese PV industry has a clear roadmap for producing PV modules, TOPCon, so nothing too cheap, around $0.15 per watt peak in 2025. It's a roadmap which has been published by the Chinese PV Industry Association a few years ago, and they stick to it, and I think they will go there. So the question that we have is, can we produce at such a cost outside of China? And then it's much more complicated. And then I discussed a lot with my colleague Philippe Massé and Elina Bosch about which numbers we should put there. So we decided to put the most competitive ones that we think we can achieve, being at scale, so producing at least 5 gigawatts. And I will maybe explain later why 5 gigawatts. Integrating vertically and getting subsidized for OPEX, CAPEX. And maybe in some case, having a technology advantage. And even the question of the technology advantage, I was extremely cautious because what I see today is that we are, in the best case, on a par with our Chinese friends. We shouldn't consider that we are better in terms of technology. We are competing in a world where basically PV technology is widely spread, known, and basically we have no technology advantage today, almost no technology advantage, except on some niche markets, some specific things. We are still on a par, which is incredible. We are on a par because we have extremely good research centers, well-funded, but we are losing the edge because companies which are able to produce at gigawatt scale have a competitive advantage. They can test things in the field while we continue to test that in research centers. And it's definitively not the same. I was saying that the price is going down significantly. And yes, it's going down. And it's probably going down for some time. Why? Because for the first time, the growth of the PV markets doesn't lie in the question of bettering the competitiveness. Not only that, because PV is competitive in almost all market segments. Maybe not to produce green hydrogen everywhere, but for everything else, PV is competitive. But the major problem that we will see globally for expanding the PV markets is a question of regulations. And India is a perfect example. How long will it take to India to install 100 gigawatt a year? I'm not going to answer, but you know the answer. It's a regulation question. It's not a question of competitiveness. What's happening in Europe? We have installed more than 40 gigawatt last year, or will we go to 100 gigawatt in the coming years? It's a question of regulations. And I can tell you, living in Belgium, that it's complicated. It's complicated to pass the message that self-consumption should be bettered, that energy communities should be allowed, that the transposition of well-written European directives into local law should be done without losing or the advantage of the directive, and so on and so on. So we will spend time increasing the market. So which means that basically the imbalance between production and demand will continue for at least 2 years, maybe 3. So it means that in the 2-3 coming years, it will be a hell for existing companies in terms of competition with Chinese competitors. And after that, it will be even more complicated because the target price is not $0.25 per watt, it's 0.15. And I don't see how we can produce at 0.15 in Europe, but that's a different. I always like to look at the evolution of PV system price. I will not spend too much time on that. What I want to say is that at $0.15 per watt peak, we are extremely, extremely close to the cost of materials in China. So there is not much room for decreasing significantly price after that, unless we change the materials that we are using. There is a cost for glass, there is a cost for aluminum, so maybe you should get rid of these ones and so on and so on. It means that now, while economies of scale played a major role in decreasing prices, and I will explain what I mean by economies of scale, now it's mostly technology improvements that will allow reducing prices further. Economies of scale. A very good report from the German association VDMA showed 2 years ago that the optimum in terms of scale for PV factory would be around 5 to 7 gigawatts. And then what our Chinese friends are doing is something totally different. Jinko announced a vertically integrated plant of 50 gigawatts some weeks ago. A 5 gigawatt vertically integrated factory represents a factory of half a square kilometer with a grid connection around 200 gigawatts. It requires 3,500 workers. It's basically the maximum that we can do in Europe. Going much further than that is almost impossible. It might be done in India, seen plans for 10, 20 gigawatts, fully integrated factories, but in Europe, it's not feasible. 50 gigawatts is something totally impossible. Imagine 30,000 workers on a site, 2 gigawatts grid connection, 2 gigawatt grid connection might need something which doesn't exist for the time being. And so basically we are entering in a world where basically now economies of scale are essential just to approach a certain level of competitiveness, but it creates a certain number of extremely complex industrial challenges. And when I'm saying that it will take time just to reach the same level of China, it's because we are not yet organized to do that. It will take years. You cannot decide to build a factory which occupies 1 square kilometer from one day to another. You cannot get a grid connection for 200 megawatts or even worse, 2 gigawatts in 3 days. We are not organized yet for that. And I will not spend too much time on that, but basically, and my colleague wanted to discuss about technology, I will not spend too much time on that. It's very, very complicated in the PV sector to go outside of the mainstream. Buyers do not like innovation, because of the mess that happened 10 years ago with new technologies not tested, brought to the market. Many developers, investors lost billions, and this is an extremely, extremely conservative industry. So it means basically either you produce the mainstream or you're facing the risk of not selling anything. And that's something also that should lead us to think differently. And what's the mainstream for the time being? It was PERC until now. It's becoming TOPCon. There is a strong push in China and to a certain extent in Europe for heterojunction and type heterojunction, but it's not exactly the same thing. And what we see emerging for the time being, for a very simple reason, it's back contact. And type back contact, where we have in Europe still a very interesting technology edge, and that's the only field where we have it. And why back contact might be interested in coming years, because it might be the only solution to reduce the consumption of silver, which might become a tremendous problem. TOPCon and even more heterojunction have a high silver consumption, which might become a problem before 2030. If PV production has to double or triple. There are plenty of projects announced in Europe. I don't know how many will be realized. Having been involved or being involved in a certain number of them, I will not give you all the names. I can tell you that it's extremely complicated for all the reasons I've mentioned before. It's very complicated because all investors are looking at the 0.15 US dollar cents per watt, which is becoming the standards at which the Chinese will sell on the market. And can we approach it? No. Can we approach 0.25? Yes, but we need to be at scale, 5 gigawatt vertically integrated with some public support. So we have a tremendous cost difference, and not only in Europe, with the other one. I will come slowly to a conclusion. There is a unique momentum, and that's a positive way to say it. I would also say it's the last chance for local PV manufacturing, and I would say it's the last chance because I was mentioning Jinko with 50 gigawatts. I don't even want to tell you what LONGi is saying, that maybe they could install in the coming years 150 gigawatts of additional production capacities every year. Okay, should I repeat it? LONGi said they would like to install 150 gigawatts of additional production capacities every year. I think they go a little bit fast on that one, but they look at the targets and they say if the world has to install 3 terawatts a year, we want to be in, and we want to be a massive actor in that. And then you say, okay, I'm thinking about a 5 gigawatt factory in Europe, and everyone is telling me that we are crazy with 5 gigawatts. Okay, that it will take 5 years. So we have a unique momentum for local PV manufacturing, and that's the last window of opportunity. It's the last window of opportunity because after that, the competition will be so fierce that it will be almost impossible. And even worse, I was saying we are still on a par with our Chinese friends. That will not last long. The last R&D results, which have been published against LONGi, are showing that on heterojunction, we are already completely beaten. It's over. It's over. I appreciate a lot Gunter Erfurt from Meyerberger, but on heterojunction, we are dead. They are 2 points higher than us in terms of efficiency, and I'm not even talking about cost. We are still on the par on TOPCon because we have extremely good equipment manufacturers in Europe. We are still on the par on back contact, also because of excellent research centers. But that's the last opportunity. It's even if we succeed in closing partially the market at some point in 5 years, we will not be able to follow the rapid development of technology, which are happening in China because of the size of the industry. Local production could be achieved if all levers are activated simultaneously. It's not just a little bit of CapEx and a little bit of OpEx. It's everything. It's massive CapEx. It's OpEx support. It's non-pricing measures. It's closing a part of the market. And I will come back to that. I know that not everyone agrees with that, but there is no way today to compete with the market prices. And in the 2-3 coming years, these extremely low market price will be there. And it's the case for all countries in the world. And I've seen so many plants of 500 megawatt, 1 gigawatt module factory here and there. It's none of these factories will be able to sell at a price which is competitive with the Chinese. None. So what are we doing? It's if we really want to compete, we need to protect the industry until it has the ability to be large enough to start reducing costs. And I will finish by that. It's most probably restrictive import rules applying to a part of the markets and smartly done to avoid loopholes, as we have seen with the minimum import price in the past. Direct upstream policy support, low cost grants, capex, tax credit, whatever, call it where you want, is a must, but it is not sufficient alone. It must be completed with local content rules, green public procurement, eco-design, whatever. And these are only effective if they are mandatory. If I will just tell you a small anecdote. I'm involved in the manufacturing projects with people who are also investing in, they are also PV developers. And so it's a little bit of a discussion. Would you, as a developer, buy at 0.25 or 0.30 if you can buy on the market at 0.15? And the answer was, of course not. And no developer in Europe, India, or everywhere in the world will buy at 40, 50, 60, or 100% of the market price if they are not obliged to do it. This will simply not happen. If it's not mandatory, there will be no market for non-Chinese companies. And I'm finishing by the question on the spot price, 0.15. I invite you, if you don't believe me, to look at PV Insight or Energy Trends, or just to call importers of Chinese-made PV models. That's the price at which you can start to discuss for delivery at the end of this year. So it's not something that's going to happen or might happen in 2 years. It's already the case. And they're fighting against each other. Now it's a question of survival. 600 gigawatt of production capacity, 300 gigawatt or 350 of market. It's just the laws of economics. They have to survive. Though they will have to make money, so they will sell at any price. And my friend Radovan Kopocek from IC Constance bet 0.12. So some people are even lower than me. I can tell you that at 0.12, even in the US, the Chinese will be hyper competitive. So even the Inflation Reduction Act, tax credit, and so on will not be sufficient to remain competitive. So I don't want to be negative. I really would like to be positive to finish. Yeah. It's to say, I want to be realistic. What are we talking about? If PV has to represent 50% or more of the energy demand in 2050, it can simply not be let in the hands of one single country. Neither China nor Germany or India or whatever. It should be spread somehow equally around the world. If we're not doing it, policymakers will simply say at some point, we don't invest in that. You ask us to destroy hundreds of thousands of jobs in the conventional energy industry, but you don't propose anything to replace them. It's very good to create jobs in China, but what about jobs in everywhere else? And if we're not doing it, the energy transition is over. Yeah. That's simply the point. So we need manufacturing. If we want to need manufacturing, we have first to be realistic. We are facing an opponent which is extremely well organized from an industry point of view. They are excellent. And I'm grateful to the Chinese. They are excellent. They are extremely difficult to beat. And so it's not a small task. And the first thing is when you have a small child, you don't let him walk on the sideway alone. You take him by the hand, just to be sure that nothing is happening. And that will be the same thing if we want to rebuild the PV industry or build a PV industry in India, in the US, in Europe. We need measures to make sure that this industry is protected. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gitan. I think that the amount of information that is there, the here and now challenge presents a huge opportunity for us to discuss both what he presented, but more importantly, how we move ahead. So without further ado, all yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. And indeed, thanks for the presentation. It's a good scene setter. I gave you a glass of cold water for you gave us a glass of cold water as well, but usefully so. So my name is Dries. I work for Solar Power Europe, so the representation of the solar sector here in Europe. We have an excellent panel with us of 6 speakers, and given that time is relatively short, I'd just like to move ahead because I think we have another 40 minutes for this panel. May I just kind of introduce you to the panelists, and also when I introduce you, maybe you raise your hand or you confirm your presence. Yeah? So we have Eliano Russo, the CEO of the Sun Gigafactory. He must be online. Eliano, can you hear us?
Yes, I am here. Good morning,
Very
everybody.
good. Good morning. We have Mr. Gerard de Leden, CTO for SolarCh. Indeed, Gerard, welcome. We have Dr. Philip Katzat, the VP for R&D. Very nice to meet you at SolarWatt. We have Mrs. Phyllis Aktash, if I pronounce it correctly. We have Zigimantas Vaikundas, who I haven't seen in the room, but maybe Zigimantas, are you online? No. Okay. So Zigimantas is not here. We're also welcoming Mr. Hugo Brouwer, Focal Point Energy for the Dutch government. Very nice to meet you, indeed. And we also have the representation from the European Commission, of course. So maybe at the end, I will give you the word back for some closing remarks to say so. Great. So to move into the conversation, I think Gaetan set out the challenge. Yeah? And with us, we have 3 companies, Sun, SolarCh, and SolarWatt, who are doing manufacturing in Europe. So I would like to start with the 3 of you, and maybe if you can give them a short overview of what's been the recipe for success behind your plans. Starting with you, Mr. Russo. The Sun Gigafactory in Sicily is a bit of a poster child success story for PV manufacturing in Europe. Could you talk us through your experience? What made it bankable? What made it work? But maybe also immediately give a perspective on the challenge that Gaetan has outlined, because I think he used the words, next year's will be hell. So, Eliano, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you, Dries, and thank you everybody for inviting us. I mean, I apologize for not being there physically, but I try to share our experience from here, from Catania, where our factory is located. Yes, Sun is a company fully owned by the Enel Group. We made an investment decision in January 2022, so 1 month before the beginning of the Ukraine conflict, to invest almost 700 million euro to refurbish our 200 megawatt lines for the production of heterojunction cells and modules. And we are now increasing.
Mr. Russo, are you online? Can we see you, or is it only vocal?
No, I have my video on. So
you have your video. Okay, then why don't you
case,
keep on speaking? We'll try to see that we can see you as well.
Okay, sure. And so we made this investment decision. We are now building this 3 gigawatt solar cells and module factory. Great.
We see you now.
That's great. Thank you. And we will commission the 3 gigawatt in July next year. The first 400 megawatt will come online already in November. And then we will target full capacity, which will make Sun the biggest European factory. But as you were saying before, of course, this is nothing compared to the figures we see in China. I think we need to prove that we can be a success story. I think the success story so far is that we are paving the way. We made our investment decision also leveraging the support coming from Europe and from Italy. Out of the 700 million euro, we are receiving 190 million euro, thanks to the Innovation Fund and thanks to the National Plan for Recovery and Resiliency, which is very welcome. But indeed, if the objective is to industrialize and to build a local value chain, I think what we are receiving is certainly not enough, in the sense that if we compare this with what similar investments are receiving in US thanks to the IRA. This is more or less 1/10 of what we would be receiving investing in US. So going back to also the report, I think I tend to agree with most of the conclusion. I mean, there is a huge time urgency. I totally agree that we need to act now if we are serious about energy independence, but it's not going to be a sprint, it's going to be a marathon. So we need to provide certainly a predictable regulatory environment to make sure that investors can make their own decision. We do need to differentiate. I agree with what the Commission said at the very beginning. So it's a game of scale, but I mean, given where we're coming from, provided that we receive the support that we need, we cannot only focus on economies of scale. So innovating is the way forward. I disagree on the conclusion made by Gatian that we are dead on a heterojunction. Actually, we started developing this technology already in 2015. Being part of the NL group, we do receive the modules, the heterojunction modules of our Chinese peers. And I think this is giving us comfort that that's not the case. There is a huge difference between declaration, data sheets, and reality. And we think we can play our game. We can show that we can compete on a global market, leveraging the technology we are developing so far. But it's true that we cannot just sleep on this. I mean, we need to continue developing. We will be adding perovskite. We need to make sure that the technology roadmap is something that we will continue to develop with the objective of always being aligned or even being at the forefront of our competitors. The challenges are there. It's clear. Prices are going dramatically down. Question is how sustainable this is. I think Gaiden also showed that this price of 15 euro cents per watt is something that maybe allows to recover the cost of the bill of material, which doesn't mean that you are able to recover your fixed cost, or even more importantly, you're able to create value with your investment. And I think this is a business that has to be sustainable, has to be profitable in order to really create jobs, contribute to gross domestic product, and eventually rebuild an industry with all the skills that are needed to make this industry competitive on a global market. So that's our experience. We are in the middle of this phase. We have to prove everything. So I'm reluctant to define the Trisan as a success, but I do recognize that Trisan wants to pave the way, wants to show that we can compete in this global market. And the support we're receiving from Euro needs to somehow adjust with the objective of industrializing. So we cannot focus only on innovative technology. I think we need to focus on the best available technology. We cannot focus only on pieces of the value chain. Reality, as we all know, the strength of a chain depends on the strength of the weakest link. So we cannot move the problem somewhere else. If we're serious about energy independence, we need to make sure that all the pieces of the value chain are covered. Otherwise, as long as we leave part of the supply chain in the hands of third parties, we'll always be dependent and at risk. And I think this is something we need to absolutely avoid. So I'll stop here in the interest of time. I'm here also to take questions. I do apologize. I will have to drop off at 10:30 sharp, but I'll be online for the next 30 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Russo. Thanks for setting out so clearly. Let me move on to the next speaker of the panel, Mr. De Leyden, Chief Technology Officer at SolarCh. So first, congratulations to you for opening a first line in the facility in the Netherlands. Can you also tell us a little bit of what made that happen? What support or what incentives have you been able to use to make your project bankable? And what's the forward look for your technology?
Yes, thank you.
I think you have to push the microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fine. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. I think that what did do the financing for us was to convince the investors. Well, first the granting schemes in the Netherlands, but also investors, and in our case that was private investors, business angels. We spoke about more than 200, I think, to showcase that we are having a game-changing technology, and the game changer is that we are not using glass and aluminum, but we are using polymers, and the polymers are really difficult to develop and to produce. And our partner SEBIC is an exclusive partnership. Worldwide is it's owned 70% by Saudi Aramco, and it's the biggest company in the world. So it's really a game changer where the partner also sees that it can induce a lot of polymer sales and volumes throughout the world, and replacing glass in a part of the solar supply chains in the module making. So yeah, we had to convince our shareholders, which took a long time, and we had to find multiple of them. So 10, and it showcases also that it's still, even though we think we have a game changer, that it's still very difficult. What we also see, and now we finished our Series A financing, that quite a lot of capital is looking into our company for the expansion phase, and we intend to start that as soon as possible in the end of this year. Our factory now is 100 megawatt with expansion locally to 400 megawatt, but then we have to go for the second one. We're discussing that. And our technology can be licensed to third parties, either companies that already are in the solar industry or newcomers. And there we have about 10 serious partners, 10 serious discussions going on. So yeah, at some point you have to pass the hurdle. And by the way, our cost and price is currently higher than the seriously higher than the market. But we focus on lightweight modules. They are fully circular, but lightweight in the Netherlands, and I'm sure various countries, lightweight is half of the roof industrial and commercial roofs in the country. And you see many empty roofs often simply because of that. So a market share where the Chinese are not, we are working on a market share where the Chinese are not that competitive, and as such we are in the, well, you could see is in the niche, but it's not a real niche because it's huge, and we are pioneers because we replaced the whole glass and aluminum by the polymer, and we package the cell by that, and we can grow with what the market will provide. And of course that's a weak spot because the cells, we fully rely on China right now, but definitely we can grow with heterojunction or new cell technologies that are going to replace the current ones. Maybe TOPCon, we're looking of course into that. So I think now is the phases where we need to make sure that the production runs well and that we are convincing the next phase, and we're speaking about 50 million roughly for the next phase growth, to go to gigawatt scale and start being visible in this map where Chinese are dominating. So I think that's my message. I think technology improvement and game-changing technology is required, because I think it was in the presentation of Gaetan as well. If you do what others did, you cannot sustain easily. You will fully depend on measures that will be taken to protect the market. But as we know, that is a complex system that takes a lot of time. So we intend to grow by technology change.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gerard. And it's a great bridge also to the next speaker, because we're here welcomed by the Vice President for R&D, Dr. Philip Ketzert from SolarWatt. So indeed, we would love to, you've been in the market for quite a long time as well. So we'd love to hear your reactions to what you heard in terms of how difficult the next years and after that even more will become, but also specifically indeed, given your role, what is the outlook for the innovation and for the technology advantage that we may still have in Europe, and how does it affect your plans as a company?
Yeah, thanks, please, for the invitation. This round.
Sorry, microphone, please.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation to this round. And first of all, I would like to thank Gaetan for his opening speech, and I think also for the publication done on the whole value stream. I think, unfortunately, I have to I could say underline what he said. I fully agree with most statements. So he has described the overall situation of the PV market in Europe, let's say, perfectly from my point of view. But I try to add some aspects. So from our point of view, yeah, we are a solar PV manufacturer since 30 years now. We are located in Germany, in Dresden, and currently we are the largest glass manufacturer in Europe. But moreover, we are also in the system business, so we are also manufacturing storages ourselves. We are also manufacturing energy management systems by ourselves, and of course, for all those three segments, we are doing our own R&D and trying to generate innovations. And this was also important in the past. For example, we have been a first mover on the glass segment. But now this more and more becomes, let's say, popular and mainstream, also available from the Chinese market. We have been a first mover on the warranty. So we have a 30-year warranty on our products, which also now becomes more and more, let's say, mainstream. We have been a first mover on the building sector. Actually, we have designed a special product for BIPV and carport application, which has received the, let's say, German ABZ, which is kind of permission to use it as a constructive material inside buildings. But now more and more, also we know that Chinese, let's say, are going in this segment and try to get those permissions. So definitely, I mean, of course, for us, it was important to differentiate and to be competitive, let's say, to have our own R&D, but we are in a very difficult environment, and we have the oversized big brother in China who's doing everything and with much more power and energy. But I also believe that in this new emerging technologies which have been named, like the TOPCon, also the perovskite tandem, I think there are opportunities. There's not everything defined yet to really have a stable, long-lasting module. Of course, this is something, as already mentioned, the customer doesn't like innovations. He wants his warranty, he wants really a guarantee. And I think there are opportunities for us in this new business. And we are working on this, but on the other side, we have also done a very intensive calculation in the past 6 months, actually, and have done a calculation for a business case of a fully integrated fab for ourselves, including, let's say, this emerging technologies. And what comes out is actually, say, more or less the same as Gajan has already described. If we have no subsidies at all, we have a price gap of about 13 cents. If we include, let's say, the current discussion on the reduced energy price, which is ongoing in Germany, and also use the TCTF funds there, we come down to a price gap maybe of about 9 cents. But I mean, overall, I mean, it doesn't pay off. So it will not pay off short term. And if you look into the details, I mean, for example, there's one, if you look from the supply chain aspects in Germany, we have a glass module. We have about 4 square meters on our module. And if you want to import glass from China, we have to pay 73% import taxes on the glass. But if you buy a Chinese glass module, you have no import tax at all. So this makes it very, very difficult for us to have really a competitive situation. And therefore, I think from my point of view, also I can really sign, I mean, we don't have to fool ourselves. I mean, innovation is important, but it will not make the only difference. I think we cannot, let's say, overtake China by innovation from my point of view. And the core is really also in the manufacturing technology. We cannot underestimate what is hidden inside this large scaling, what know-how we need really to operate such extremely large fabs. And I mean, there is know-how in getting the right yield. It's know-how in the equipment. Let's say there is know-how also in the logistics of such large material streams. There's also know-how in the material supply, which is mainly located also in Asia, in the automation, in reduction of labor. And I think from my point of view, we really need also, if we look to our business case back, we need a significant amount of subsidy on the capex to first realize such a plant. But further on, we need also tremendous effort on the OPEX to operate this fab really competitive, I think, for years. And it will be a huge effort, let's say, to bring really large scale PV manufacturing back to Europe.
Thank you very much. Can I just play back to you what I heard in terms of the price gap you were talking about? So for the moment, it's around 13 cents. But then with the support through the state aid rules and also through the German government in terms of electricity prices, that would reduce with 4 cents to 9 cents.
About 9 to 10 cents. Yes.
Yeah. So despite all these quite big efforts, let's say the price gap reduction is not that big in the end, or at least that's my reading. Would you agree with my reading, or?
No, absolutely disagree. I mean, 10 cents. I mean, it's extremely large, isn't it?
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I mean, this is. I mean, we come later to this point, but this you cannot just fill in by norm price criteria. From my point of view, it's absolutely impossible.
If I may just comment on that, there is a willingness to pay from a certain number of developers, a rather small difference, around 10%. So 2 cents in general. When you go above these 2 cents, that totally disappears. And 10 cents is something which kills completely any kind of possible competition. So if you look at the global PV market, which is roughly 50% centralized application, utility scale, 50% distributed ones, residential, commercial, industrial, and it's roughly the same in Europe. The utility scale market is not addressable. It's almost impossible. And so the problem is that all companies, and I'm taking the European case, are trying to focus on the residential and small commercial segment. And if we look at that segment in 2022's European PV markets, it's something like 7 to 8 gigawatts, maybe 10 gigawatts. So it's a rather small one, and where the Chinese are super good as well, because some people just don't want to pay more. And then the problem that we have is make it very short, without restricting the markets for the European PV industry, the ability simply to sell will be reduced significantly in the coming years because of the increased gap. It's as simple as that.
Indeed, yeah. Thanks for that intervention. Maybe just to continue with the first round with the panelists, we also are welcoming Mrs. Phyllis Aktash, here, the CEO, Office Coordinator, and also Executive Member of the Board at Smart Solar. So we have heard now from 3 European companies operating here, and I think Gaëtan is also right, like focusing on a certain niche market segments to be able to win a competition. But tell us a little bit of what's happening in Turkey, because you do seem to be successful there in terms of bringing some scale to manufacturing. And what would you say is a lesson to Europe as well?
Thank you. First, I would like to give you an overview of current situation and history of the solar sector in Turkey. In 2014, our installed capacity only 40 megawatt in Turkey. And now we have 10 gigawatt installed capacity. And in 2017, this capacity increased to over 3 gigawatts, thanks to feed-in tariffs provided by our government and new capacity expansions. And also our government not only provided feed-in tariffs, but also provided protection for local manufacturers by regulations and custom tariffs, anti-dumping regulations, etc. Otherwise, we couldn't be here today and we couldn't talk about the success story. And we still have these restrictions in Turkey. If we are talking about European Union, I think European Union made a decision in 2018 by ending restrictions on sale of solar modules, and it was a sacrifice of manufacturing sector in Europe. And On the good side, European Union has already have the power of technology. You have really good institutions for R&D, and you are still creating the technology, cutting-edge technology, breakthrough technology for solar energy. And it's very important because we are here because of this technology. It's feasible because of this technology. Turkey has demonstrated its production capacity in the automotive sector before. Now we are demonstrating in solar sector because we have a very young, skilled population in Turkey. It's a power of Turkey. And with this expertise, I think Turkey is also a strong candidate to become a reliable production hub in the solar sector, in my opinion, as well. And today, as smart solar, today in Turkey, according to Turkish Solar Industrials Association, we have 20 gigawatt manufacturing capacity with over 45 manufacturing companies. And 8 of them have over 1 gigawatt manufacturing capacities. And it happens in 5 years. It just takes the demand in Turkey, increase of demand in Turkey, and continuing restrictions for imported modules. You need to protect your market. You need to support your manufacturers by regulations, and you need to support your R&D with industry. It's the key element of the success, in my opinion, as well. And for my company, we have now 3 gigawatt solar manufacturing capacity in Turkey with 3 different facilities. And we are investing in TOPCon cell technology this year with 2 gigawatt capacity. And we are expanding our business into the United States thanks to IRA. And it's a good example for EU because they have very concrete, very clear incentives in the United States at the moment, and they are attractive all the investments in solar sector. We are hearing every day another announcement for module manufacturing, cell manufacturing, even ingot and wafer in the United States. And they have tax credits, they have grants, and they are supporting every company from every country. They're very equal with these incentives too. This is important too.
Yes, thank you very much. Can I just ask one follow-up question? So at what prices is the manufacturing capacity in Turkey able to produce? So what is the, we've heard from Gaetan that Chinese prices are going down.
With the Chinese manufacturers with the same prices. We talked about cost and volume. We have local content for projects in Turkey, and we have some premium incentives for local content. It's not mandatory for all the time, but it's usually very attractive for the manufacturers and for the investors as well. And there is another thing. We are following sustainability goals in Turkey too. It's mandatory for financing of the projects. As you know, we are very aware of CO2 footprint, traceability of the products, etc. So it's another factor.
Yes, thank you. Then I move to the Zigemantas Vaikunas is unfortunately not able to join. So I move to the last speaker, Mr. Brouwer. You work for the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So thank you for joining. What's your perspective on this conversation? What can you tell us about the initiatives that you're taking in the Netherlands, and also what you're taking together maybe on the European level? How are you perceiving this? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, at the European level, I gladly leave to European Commission. I think will be next in line also to speak. I'm from the Foreign Ministry, I should say. So part of this policy is covered by our Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy. My main aim is here also to listen very well to all the key parties and their reflections to understand what we can do better in our policy. And the need in the Netherlands for this is very clear. Last year, our solar output grew by 50%. So this is in 1 year 50% more, and this trend is of course only continuing. So we try to facilitate as good as possible this development. In a recent spring note, we allocated 35 billion euro for various climate and energy related measures, not only to facilitate solar, but this is an important aspect of it. From the Foreign Ministry, we also deal with the relations with developing countries, and the Netherlands has as its goal in 2030 to support renewable energy, mainly through solar, to 100 million people. So also, I'm trying to find out how this all these insights here can feed into that cooperation. And of course, I'm as a Dutch government representative glad to have here a Dutch company at the table, leading Dutch company. So that and last but not least, thanks to the ISA for taking up this initiative. I hope it will also lead to some clear recommendations for the whole ISA membership. Thank you.
Thank you. Indeed, but maybe a quick follow-up question. So in your work at the Foreign Affairs Office in the Netherlands, is the topic of supply chain diversification present? Is it increasing? Is there an increasing awareness of that being a topic, let's say, as important as cooperation on renewables deployment?
No, of course, but I should be a bit modest because it's mainly through our Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy. They are in the lead there, but of course, it has our full attention, of course.
Indeed, and I'm also turning to the Commission representative. So indeed, you are probably better placed than we are with European policy. What's your reflection after you heard this and after some of the challenging numbers and figures and outlook that we see?
Yes, thank you. Well, I should probably have introduced myself at the very beginning. I'm actually not a person working on the value chain. I am working in the international relation unit of DG Ener, and my job so far has been to with ISA, but also with the African counterpart, to really work on how to develop renewable energy across the world. So, and the question of manufacturing was not yet so far on our radar, at least in that aspect of our work. But I think for me, the presentation of Gaëtan was really an eye-opener. I think there's the reality of the market, the challenge that lies ahead. I think there's a great opportunity to seize, but it's not going to be easy. And it was very positive to hear that there are some stories that seem to be that some European player, Turkish player, seem to be able to find their sector where they can show that through innovation, by finding financiers that help getting there, we are able to position ourselves, and it's not impossible. I think while there's the reality of the market, there's also stories that are positive, and we can make it happen. But then we will have to work all together. And I think here the European Commission's role to guide the policy environment, but as you said yourself, the role of the member states to translate it fast and to respect the spirit of the European directive will be important, because it's only when it's translated that it actually has a ground. I noted the comment by Mr. Russo of it's not going to be a sprint, it's going to be a marathon. I think not only do we have to do all the policy aspects to make the regulatory framework to be matching the needs, but also the protection protection of the market and all this. It will have to be sustained in the long term. So I think it's important message to politicians, to policymakers, that it's not something to talk about for now and then not look longer in the longer term. So I think these were important aspects that I kept in mind. We spoke a lot about the EU. We did mention that the US IRA is certainly this comprehensive package that countries could be looking at to support. I think the European are getting together to have their own response to the IRA. But there's space for others also. We spoke of India, and I think indeed we also need to see more players in other markets developing to create more balance. And I'm thinking, I understand that technology requires an industrial base, and not everybody can start producing this technology, but I'm sure there are other players, possibly in Latin America, in some parts of Africa, who could also be there. And I hope we can work also on that together, because only if we are developing global value chains which benefit various parts of the world will it be a just transition, which in the end we are all aiming towards. That would be my conclusion. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. And maybe just a question for the other panelists as well, and maybe also for Mr. Russo, if you're still with us for the last minute, that relates to that. To what extent does Europe actually need to build the entire supply chain in Europe?
In Europe.
As opposed to having a more global diversification perspective where we benefit from the benefits and advantages in different places? Because in the end, what we're looking for is mostly diversification for resilience. So that's maybe a question. And Eliano, maybe I pose this to you if you're still there, because you were saying like we really need to have the entire supply chain back in Europe. Is that the most cost-effective way of thinking about it, or should we think a little bit more global diversification?
Thank you, Dries. Thank you for the question, and I do apologize. I have to leave in 1 minute. But I think to answer your question, we need to ask ourselves why are we doing this? I think we need to go back to the rationale, the strategic rationale behind, because if going solar is driven by the objective of tackling a climate crisis, so starting with Repower Europe and then the Net Zero Industry Act, then I agree with you. I mean, the localization of the supply chain becomes an issue of secondary importance. No, you'd rather make sure that you minimize the cost associated to the ability to achieve a very ambitious sustainability target in order to stabilize the concentration of CO2 in atmosphere. My reading is that, especially reading the Net Zero Industry Act, is we say, yes, we want to install in Europe more than 500 gigawatt of solar between now and 2030, and we would like half of this installation to be done relying a domestic chain, because we think that energy independence has a value. If we all believe that energy independence has a value, then I think we have to be aware that, as I said at the very end of my previous speech, I mean, a chain is only as strong as the weakest link. We have to be aware of this, because otherwise we can make tremendous effort and investment and still remain substantially, and I would say dramatically, dependent on third parties. And again, if the market is diversified, might not be an issue. But if the market is concentrated, and increased concentration, as Gaten shows us in the report, it might be an issue. It might be an issue. I hope this answered the question, and I do apologize, but I have to leave. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Eliana. Thanks, and have a good day later.
Thank you. Bye.
Mrs. Aktas, maybe I also pose the same question to you. Is there something you would say that a Turkish-EU cooperation where we can mutually benefit from your investments and from European investments to together create a more diverse supply chain?
Yes, of course. In my opinion, European manufacturers should focus on certain areas like high technology cell production, and for the other manufacturing like module, polysilicon, etc. Maybe you can maintain some strategic partnerships with other countries like Turkey. I'm talking about Turkey because we are very close to European Union, and when we are considering CO2 emissions, transporting all these goods from long distance also have some price for European Union on the sustainability side, environmental side. That's why I think Turkey should be a strategic partner for manufacturing and diversification of the supply chain. And diversification is the key point of this matter, because we cannot say that we concentrate all the manufacturing in Turkey or in India. It's the same thing with China. But we cannot rely on China as well, because today polysilicon is commodity. They are controlling the price like oil and gas, and they are controlling the capacity. And we rely on them. It will be like Russian invasion of Ukraine. When they decide to stop their supply, we won't have any choice. Or when they increase price, when they decrease price, we will depend on them. Thank you.
It's very difficult often to find a good balance when speaking between saying we want a cheap energy transition and we want a local industry. But I think we need both. And the message I try to pass, which is the message that Zygmantas Vaikonias would have conveyed if he could have participated today, is that we don't need to close the market completely on one side, but we cannot leave it completely open either. That's a little bit the question. We need imports at 15 cents. I'm really happy if part of installations in Europe can be done with modules at 15 cents and accelerate the energy transition. If it's the Chinese government that pays, I have no problem with that. At least for part of the market, it shouldn't kill the industry either. On the other side, the question of, and I would like to go in exactly in the same direction as Eliana from Enel, we need the value chain completely in all of our countries. It's a question of sovereignty. It's a question of control. It doesn't mean that we need to produce 100% of everything, but we need the ability to produce from polysilicon to modules. Same thing for inverters. We don't need to be present in all the technologies, but we need to be able, at least from polysilicon to module, to produce it without external intervention in case of. It means equipment manufacturers. It means glass productions. It means EVA or polyolefin production. It means junction box production. And of course, we need to continue importing and exporting. We just need to put at some point a certain percentage of what we want to produce locally and make sure that these companies can develop and thrive. And I have no doubt that in some years from now, we'll have giants able to compete with their Chinese counterparts in India, in the US, in Europe. But to achieve that, we need to make sure that we have a part, and it's a word that we don't like, but part of the industry which is protected in all steps of the value chain. So nothing can be missing.
If I may just kind of also involve our colleagues from the Commission and from the Dutch government working on foreign affairs, international relationships. So would that balance between closing certain markets, having certain import restrictions, while at the same time also having to rely on that for the cost-effective development. What's your perspective on striking that balance? How what do you know from, let's say, foreign affairs relations, trade dynamics, whether this is a feasible dynamic or whether that's going to be a very difficult balancing exercise? Hugo, yeah. Microphone, sorry. Yeah.
I think I first give the word to the new commission. It's, I think, fair.
Also not a trade expert. I can just maybe from the energy side, we have to respect the WTO standards. So really closing barriers, I think, have to be done in a way that we are not breaching this international engagement. What we have done in the energy sector is, for example, looking at, I'm talking the revised Renewable Energy Directive, which introduces sustainability criteria on biofuel, for example. It seems reasonable to think that if you realize that one technology is actually harming the planet because it creates deforestation, that you would introduce criteria that allows buyers to make an informed choice of what they are buying. We are not banning biofuel entering the EU market. We are just giving the possibility to trace better and for the buyer to make an informed decision. And I think this is a measure that is okay for us to take because it's not going against WTO standards, but it gives the choice on the European market to favor one product against the other. It's also what CBAM, in a way, the carbon border tax mechanism will be introducing by giving more, it's a bit different because here we are trying to adjust the competition for EU makers with what comes from abroad, which is not always produced in the same condition, so that everybody competes on fair ground. Again, it's got WTO compliant, but it's a different approach. And I think we have to always think measures that respect this. We probably have to be innovative and think a bit how we can do that. What I know is that it's usually difficult to sell to our international partners, and we have to justify a lot and explain, and we might face similar criticism if we start to introduce restriction on importation, unless we can really justify that it's based on criteria that are aligned with the sustainability values that we have in the EU and that align with Paris Agreement and SDGs compliance and all these other international commitments that we have.
Honestly, I've not that much to add to this. I think this is a very complete overview. It's about open strategic autonomy, and you have to find the right balance in there.
Absolutely, and that becomes a priority as well for the Spanish presidency in the second part. I'm conscious of time, but I would like to give the last word to all of the panelists to give you one, let's say, magic solution, or the one thing you'd suggest to European policymakers what they would need to do if we are to reach the 30 gigawatts full supply chain back to Europe to reshore that. So what do you think, what is your supposed magic silver bullet point, or at least an important part? I realize that Mr. Russo is not there anymore, so maybe I'll start with Gerard. What would be your advice? What's the most important bit for the European policy on reshoring solar?
That's really a very difficult question, because I try to find at least a minimum answer of one answer, but there isn't. And I think, but I have to give one answer. I think that the simplest one to turn the button is not mentioned, I think, today, but it's a CO2 emission trading system, because that will at least contribute to a level playing field, but only and only if we have the carbon border adjustment mechanism working, and that is by far too late, to be honest, because as far as I know, the solar industry isn't even mentioned in the carbon border taxes. So it's going to be after 26. There's a big question mark when it will be. So yeah, the button to turn is the CO2 tax. It will help everybody. The gains, the profits from that CO2 tax, put it back into the industry that is clean tech, either by the producers and the buyers, and especially those who can't afford higher energy prices. And I think, yeah, that are the main buttons.
It's great. Yep. Very sensible. Thank you. Mr. Katzet, what's your wish, top number one on the wish list? And mine is to put on the microphone.
Most of the requirements have already been said. I think it's the optimal mix between the subsidies on the capex, opex, and the local content. From my point of view, what I have a bit a fear. I mean, we have on the other side, let's say, China, let's say, with a I mean, not really a democratic system, very strong, let's say, with a long plan, let's say, in a way, with one voice and a lot of power. And then on the other side, there's Europe with this, let's say, legislation framework, but I mean, not too much power, let's say. Then there are all those member states. So from my point of view, I cannot really see. I mean, there are those targets defined, which are pretty clear in a way, but where is really on the execution? Let's say the spirit of really bringing the people together. I mean, the member states together and looking for I mean other, let's say, alternative actions. Leaving the let's say the existing framework in a way, because I mean there's a requirement to act now. There are extremely, let's say, efforts required, but I cannot see this. I'm missing a bit this spirit. I mean, we have this European Solar Industry Alliance in December, but a half year have passed since then. I cannot really observe that things have changed. So I'm wishing more, let's say, yeah, more power there, more effort and focus. I mean, really on this topic, and really bring I mean, member states together to really drive action.
Absolutely, here to that. And we're, of course, together with the ESMC and a part of the steering committee of that Solar Industry Alliance. And yeah, it needs to step up and go a little bit faster into delivering some outcomes. Absolutely. Great. With that, I believe we reached the end of the first panel. I might thank you to all panelists for being here with us. Apologies for running over some 15 minutes, and I'm passing the word back to the chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to add my words of thanks. As we have noticed, the manufacturing initiatives are stuck between four policy objectives. Obviously, we need to enhance local employment. You know, countries ask if we are increasing demand by so many times. We are removing the emphasis on fossil fuel electricity generation to solar electricity generation. Where are the jobs? That's number one. The second is that these imply that we need to look at the long term when we are looking at these demands, but act now. So you're in a sense investing for the future. There's the second. The third is that in all of this, you are looking at issues that have to do with international trade, amongst other things, and therefore they have to be WTO compliant. I mean, the two initiatives with which I was involved, the US Inflation Reduction Act and the Indian Production Linked Incentive Program, both spent a huge amount of time thinking on how they could become WTO compliant. And I'm sure that the similar must have been the case with the EU decision making as well. And then there's the fourth. How on earth do we invest now in the materials, invest in research, in the materials particularly, so that tomorrow's movements, that tomorrow's dynamics are crucially available. And this, amongst other things, looks at the number of players. I think Gitan mentioned that there is a huge amount of production capacity, even in China, and there is a huge amount of competition that is occurring between the players there. Most of these have moved with the technology of the times. So there are two answers to this. I don't think either of them will be exclusive. One is, how do we ensure that we build up a global supply chain? Would it make sense, paraphrasing your comments, would it make sense, for example, to do ingot and cell development at one place and do the module development at another place? Can we develop the kinds of linkages that are needed for competencies and raw materials in order to do that? And second, how on earth can we create a lot more players? Or, Gitan, I look at your reflections on the size of plants. Will it be the same number of players but with larger plant sizes? I suspect it will be both. But as we look ahead, I'm extremely grateful to each one of you for being here, for your comments, and for this discussion, which has helped us in moving ahead. Thank you all very, very much. We regather, coffee is ready. We can start off. We regather here in actually 10 minutes at 11 o'clock for the discussion on the solar facility. So again, many thanks, and join us for a cup of coffee.